So if we take this thing ahead and we look at the state of Bihar, which is the starting state of the capital state of, we could say, the Bimaru states, because it started Bim, B-I-M-A-R-U, and B for Bihar. So what has been the turnaround over there, and what is the cause for these recent 5 years of successes over there?
Again, growth is a large part about catch-up. Poor parts of India, or poor parts of the world, let me first take the world, grow faster than the large parts. Why? They can import the technology, they can import the know-how, they don't have to invest in that. And they're moving out of agriculture into more productive non-agriculture, and therefore that automatically lifts up the growth rate. So therefore, what we are seeing in Bihar is what we saw in Rajasthan a decade earlier. Rajasthan is also part of Bimaru, and is no longer considered a Bimaru. And Uttar Pradesh now is also, despite massive corruption, etc., is also beginning to proceed faster. So, I think there are determinants of growth, and what most of the literature has found is that the more open a society, the more economic freedom you have, you get higher growth. Not necessarily more political freedom, but more economic freedom. We have had political freedom in India ever since our independence. But during the first 30 years, or 40 years till 1990, we didn't have much economic freedom. And it's not a coincidence that our growth has come about at a stage when we had economic freedom. Now, Bihar started growing in 2003-04, and the rest of India started growing in the early 90s after the reforms. That's just a natural process. Things are exactly as one would predict.
Right, sir. So, since we have linkages with the energy sector, we as an organization, the Independent Power Producers Association of India, what is your outlook on energy? Whether it is incentivizing fresh investments in the generation or distribution sector, and how do we take this sector ahead?
Well, energy, one is we've just seen the recent new pricing of energy products. And to me, I've tried to study the subject, it's a mystery, how the oil and subsidy policy of India works, or perhaps more accurately, doesn't work. Because it doesn't matter whether the price of oil is 150 or the price of oil is 70, our deficits, that is, subsidies to the oil sector, keeps going up. If somebody can explain that to me, and perhaps your organization can, and I would recommend that if you put out a study just studying this in micro detail, that'll be very, very useful. I think there's a lot of hidden behind the scenes corruption, or let's say non-transparency, let me not use the word corruption, in the way we do it. Let me just give you an example where the people are misled. Let us say the price of oil is 100, okay, and we put a tax on it of 50%. Right. So now the price of oil is 150. We then subsidize the oil companies or whoever and sell the oil at 125. Right. Now, is it the case that we are subsidizing or we are taxing? Now, and who says that we should not open up the refinery system, etc., to the private sector? So the government really has, I think it's like the food prices, completely mishandled. And I think it's not been exposed enough that how we have done. Remember that between 1998 and 2004, oil price was raised some 32 times. There wasn't a single murmur in the street as to when it happened. And then the UPA government came in, rejected that policy, brought in their so-called in the name of the poor policies to help the poor, which they're now overturning. And we find the strange case of the BJP now protesting about it. So I think the energy side has been grotesquely mishandled by the politicians, and that's been a real tragedy. And as I said, that the remarkable thing about India is, despite all of this, it manages to grow, despite all of the interventions of the government and misinterventions of the government.
Finally, sir, we'd like to know, since you, in your long and distinguished innings as an economist, you have also spent some time in a very prominent investment bank, one of the biggest investment banks in the world and one of the most respected. and one that has in fact still come clean, as where the others have fallen by the wayside from this financial crisis. So where do you think was the problem? Was there a lack of regulation in the financial sector in the West, or was it just that greed really overthrew everything else?
Well, it's a tough one. I think there's a lot of macroeconomics in the crisis, and the macroeconomics I'm thinking about is how China deeply undervalued its exchange rate. That made surpluses possible. That made that they were willing to throw away money, and so on and so forth. On the other side, I think there was a problem with the regulation, and the problem with the regulation was allowing the amount of leverage that the investment banks were allowed to have. And I think that is one of the major conclusions from any objective analysis, and indeed the new finance bill tries to diminish the amount of leverage that the banks can have.
Right.
So I think and leverage, if you will, is greed. But then if you don't have leverage, at least in my book, the greed is still there. You want to earn more. I think greed has been unnecessary. If you define that whatever good comes out from ambition as non-greed and whatever bad comes out from ambition as greed, then you are defining away the problem. Greed is a desire to accumulate, and that's what capitalism is. It engenders, it sort of provokes individuals and firms to produce more, to acquire more wealth, and I think that's what makes the world go round.